Hello and welcome. It's so nice to have you here, just for a little while. I hope you're feeling cozy, wherever you might be. Tonight, we'll drift together into the quiet, strange, and sometimes unsettling world of ancient tales. Tales of love and longing from Greek mythology. Stories that are beautiful, yes, but also a little haunting. I'd love to know where you're joining me from, and what time it is as you listen. Maybe you'll leave a tiny note in the comments. Just a soft whisper of your presence in this moment. So, let's settle, gently, into the world of gods and mortals, of hearts that ache and desires that twist into darkness. Imagine the soft glow of ancient Greece, the olive trees swaying in the night breeze, and the distant murmur of legends that have traveled through thousands of years. Tonight, the mood is quiet, a little eerie, a little tender, and as we begin, let yourself drift into these old, disturbing love stories, letting the myths unfold, slowly, softly, in the tranquil days of ancient Greece, when gods walked among mortals with pride and purpose. Apollo, the radiant god of music, prophecy, and the sun, was celebrated for his unmatched skill with the bow and his triumph over formidable challenges. Known for his confidence and brilliance, Apollo often reveled in his victories, believing no one could surpass his mastery. Among the gods, he had gained renown not only for his prowess, but also for his striking beauty, which radiated like the morning sun, commanding the attention of all who witnessed it. Yet, in one fateful moment, his pride would spark a chain of events that would intertwine desire, rejection, and divine intervention in a story remembered for millennia. The origins of this tale began with a boast, as many of Apollo's adventures did, having recently defeated the monstrous Python, a serpent of great size and menace. Apollo returned to Olympus, proud and self-assured. In the glow of triumph, he mocked Cupid, the young god of love, who wielded a bow and arrows unlike any other. Apollo, confident in his accomplishments, dismissed the power of love as trivial compared to the might of skill and valor. He laughed at Cupid, calling him a boy playing with dangerous toys, incapable of affecting gods or mortals with anything more than fleeting whims. Yet, the slights of the proud rarely went unanswered. Cupid, incensed by Apollo's arrogance, recognized that even gods are vulnerable to forces they underestimate. Cupid's response was precise, calculated, and deeply ironic. He chose 2 arrows to intervene in Apollo's life, one tipped with gold, meant to ignite irresistible desire, and the other tipped with lead, designed to instill aversion and rejection. These were not merely tools of mischief. They represented the duality of love itself, with its power to inspire longing and its ability to inflict frustration. As the golden arrow struck Apollo, it awakened within him an uncontrollable passion for the nymph Daphne, a daughter of the river god Peneus. She was untouched by desire, devoted to her independence, and a symbol of chastity and natural grace. The irony, however, lay in Cupid's other arrow. Daphne herself was struck by the leaden tip, ensuring that she would recoil from any feeling of attraction, fleeing instinctively from the very god whose beauty and brilliance captivated her. In this subtle orchestration, Cupid transformed a moment of arrogance into a tragic pursuit. Apollo's desire, once dormant, now burned fiercely, leaving him restless and determined, while Daphne's innocence and instinctive rejection created a tension that could not be reconciled by logic or negotiation. Even as the winds carried the fragrance of flowers and the whispers of streams throughout the forested valleys, Apollo's gaze sought Daphne, drawn by a longing that was both divine and human, while Daphne's steps quickened in instinctive fear. What began as a simple act of pride and mockery had, through divine intervention, set the stage for a tale of pursuit and evasion. A story where desire and resistance collided in a way that neither god nor mortal could easily untangle. This moment of divine retribution reminds us that pride, even among the gods, can ignite consequences beyond imagination. The interplay of desire and rejection, orchestrated by forces both playful and merciless, would soon unfold into a chase that blurred the lines between mortals and immortals, between freedom and destiny. And so, with Apollo's heart aflame and Daphne unaware of the storm approaching, the first threads of an inescapable pursuit were woven, leaving one question lingering in the quiet of the ancient woods. How far would desire drive a god? And how far could instinct protect a nymph determined to remain free? As Apollo's desire for Daphne deepened, he found himself consumed by a force he had never before experienced. The god who had once moved effortlessly through victory and glory now struggled with a longing that made him restless, impatient, and almost frantic. His usual composure, honed through centuries of triumphs, was replaced by an urgency that forced him to seek her presence in every glade, along every winding stream, and beneath every canopy of leaves where Daphne might pass. This was a pursuit, fueled not only by attraction but also by the humiliation of being denied, feeling Apollo, in his pride, found intolerable. For the first time, a god faced the humbling frustration of desire without control, a lesson in the power of love that even divine strength could not overcome. Meanwhile, Daphne, unaware of the cause of this sudden attention, moved with an instinctive caution that was almost preternatural. Her life had been devoted to solitude, to the forests and rivers that were her home, and to a vow of chastity that defined her very identity. The leaden arrow of Cupid ensured that she recoiled from Apollo's gaze, sensing in it a danger she could not yet name. The mere sight of his golden-haired radiance and the warmth of his presence sparked a primal alarm, compelling her to flee rather than to consider the appeal of his desire. Every step she took through the undergrowth was guided by instinct and the quiet counsel of her father, Phineus, whose protective gaze, though distant, shaped her understanding of safety and escape. The tension between them became a dance of near encounters and narrow escapes, each moment thick with anticipation yet devoid of resolution. Apollo's heart, driven by the golden arrow, compelled him to follow relentlessly, his voice calling out, pleading, and occasionally boasting of the inevitability of his love. Daphne, in contrast, moved like a shadow, gliding through the trees with a grace that suggested both fear and resolve. Even the smallest bird, the rustling of leaves, or the babbling of a brook became markers in a world that now existed for two, their separate paths converging yet never truly meeting. Each moment heightened the contrast between desire and denial, a tension that would not be reconciled until forces far beyond their control intervened. The gods themselves watched with quiet fascination, recognizing the irony of the situation. Apollo, whose triumphs had once seemed limitless, now faced an obstacle in the form of a nymph whose resistance was as natural as the river that bore her name. Cupid, observing his own handiwork, likely felt a mixture of satisfaction and amusement, aware that even divine beauty and power could be humbled by love's cunning hand. In this unfolding struggle, the story of Apollo and Daphne transformed from a simple tale of attraction into a meditation on the unpredictable nature of desire, the consequences of pride, and the power of forces both mortal and divine. operate beyond reason or control, as the chase stretched across forests and glens. The question lingered, pressing and unrelenting. How far could Apollo pursue? And how far could Daphne flee, before the natural world itself demanded a resolution to a desire that neither mortal nor God could fully contain? The stage was set for a transformation that would mark not just their lives but the very symbols of love, pursuit, and escape for generations to come. The pursuit of Daphne by Apollo, driven by desire and pride, reached a moment where the natural world itself seemed to intervene. The forests, rivers, and mountains, silent witnesses to the chase, became active participants in her flight. Daphne's legs carried her swiftly through thickets and glades, her breaths coming in sharp, determined gasps. Apollo, though divine, pressed relentlessly behind her, propelled by the golden arrow's insistent pull. Each step she took, however, seemed to draw her closer to a destiny she had not yet imagined, a transformation that would preserve her freedom while leaving. Apollo, in the agonizing grip of unfulfilled desire, realizing that no ordinary path could secure her escape, Daphne raised a desperate plea to her father. Peneus, the river god, whose domain included the waters and groves that had nurtured her since birth. Her voice, trembling with urgency, carried through the wind and across the branches of trees. "Father," she called, "save me from this god's pursuit. Let the earth or water protect me, if I cannot protect myself." Peneus, bound by both love and divine power, answered in a way that mirrored the fateful intervention of the gods in all such stories. Before Apollo could reach her, Daphne felt her limbs stiffen and her body transform. Bark and leaves sprouted from her skin, her feet rooted to the soil, and her hair turned into the green of new shoots. She had become the laurel tree, her essence intertwined with the earth, an eternal symbol of purity and escape. Apollo arrived moments too late, witnessing the miraculous transformation with disbelief and a sense of loss that transcended ordinary grief. The nymph he desired, whose beauty and vitality had captivated him so completely, now existed in a form he could neither embrace nor possess. Yet even in his disappointment, Apollo's admiration did not wane. In a gesture of reverence and memory, he consecrated the laurel as his sacred tree, adorning himself with its leaves in triumph, in mourning, and in remembrance. The god of the sun and music carried the laurel as a symbol of achievement and unattainable love, an eternal reminder that desire, even when thwarted, could inspire devotion and creativity rather than destruction. This conclusion of Apollo's pursuit illustrates the delicate balance of power, desire, and autonomy in Greek mythology. Even gods, powerful and radiant, were bound by the consequences of their actions and the intervention of other divine forces. Daphne's transformation preserved her freedom while creating a lasting emblem of purity, evasion, and the natural world's subtle dominion over human and. The story leaves a lingering question. Could Apollo have pursued differently, with respect rather than insistence? Or was the tragedy inevitable, dictated by pride, intervention, and the nature of desire itself? In the quiet aftermath, the laurel stood tall, leaves whispering in the wind, a living testament to a pursuit that reshaped not only a god's understanding of desire, but also the symbolism of love, resistance, and transformation for centuries to come. Even today, when poets crown themselves with laurel, the echo of that chase reminds us of the interplay between longing and restraint, between pursuit and autonomy, and the subtle power of forces both mortal and divine that shape our stories. In the soft light of a Grecian morning, when the sun cast a gentle gold across the rolling hills and quiet rivers. Daphne wandered through the forest, unaware of the divine gaze that had already found her. She moved with the effortless grace of someone completely at ease in the natural world, her bare feet brushing the cool grass and leaves, her hands occasionally trailing along the bark of familiar trees. For Daphne, the woods were a sanctuary, a place where time and the demands of the wider world held no sway. Here, in the embrace of rivers and groves, she felt a freedom that even gods could not fully understand. It was in this serene moment that Apollo first saw her. The god of light, radiant and self-assured, paused on a distant hilltop, his gaze falling upon the nymph with the intensity of one accustomed to being desired and admired. In her movement, he saw a fluid beauty that surpassed any mortal or immortal he had ever known. Her hair, shining like spun gold in the sun, framed a face unmarked by vanity, radiant only with the natural innocence of youth. The very air around her seemed to shimmer, carrying the scent of flowers and the freshness of forest streams, and in that instant, Apollo's attention was riveted entirely on her. It was a gaze that could have inspired awe or alarm in a mortal, but Daphne, wholly immersed in her own world, remained unaware of the god's presence. The moment of first sight carried with it an intensity that neither mortal caution nor divine pride could mitigate. Apollo, struck by the golden arrow of Cupid, felt a surge of desire so profound that it seemed to ripple through every aspect of his being. The warmth of his own presence, the brilliance of his form, and the confidence he usually wielded effortlessly were now sharpened into a singular focus: the nymph before him. For Apollo, this was no mere attraction. It was an all-consuming fascination, a hunger that demanded pursuit and attention. Every detail of Daphne, her expression, the sway of her movement, the soft rustling of her garments became magnified, a study in perfection that awakened both longing and impatience. Yet Daphne, guided by the leaden arrow that ensured resistance, remained instinctively cautious, even if she did not consciously understand why. There was a subtle tension in the air, a quiet anticipation that foreshadowed the inevitable collision of desire and denial. Even the smallest creatures of the forest seemed to sense it. The birds paused mid-song, the leaves rustled in an unusual hush, and the streams appeared to hold their flow for a fleeting moment. In this silence, the scene was set for a pursuit that would blur the lines between divine will and mortal instinct, between longing and fear. This first glance was more than a meeting of eyes. It was the spark that would ignite the chase, the catalyst for a story of desire, transformation, and the enduring tension between pursuit and escape. It left a question lingering in the cool morning air. Would Apollo's fascination be fulfilled? Or was this moment of initial vision the beginning of a pursuit destined to reshape both their lives in ways neither could yet foresee? The moment stretched beyond ordinary perception, as if time itself slowed to accommodate the intensity of Apollo's fascination. Every movement of Daphne became a rhythm in a silent symphony, each step a note that resonated with the god's desire. He followed cautiously at first, almost hidden among the tall trees, yet every instinct within him urged him to close the distance. Apollo, accustomed to triumph and mastery, felt a tension unlike any other, a mixture of exhilaration and frustration, as though the very force of the forest conspired to delay the inevitable. The air carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, and in that fragrance, he sensed a purity and freedom that were elusive and intoxicating all at once. Daphne, for her part, remained unaware of the precise source of her unease. The forest had always been her sanctuary, a place of clarity and calm, yet now a subtle alertness guided her movements. The brush of leaves beneath her fingers, the whisper of wind along the branches, and even the reflections in the streams seemed to signal caution. Her heart quickened for reasons she could not name, her instincts alerting her to an unseen presence. Though she had never encountered Apollo directly, the leaden arrow of Cupid ensured that desire would not touch her. Only the awareness of a pursuit she could neither explain nor ignore. It was this tension, a silent but potent resistance, that made the encounter far more than a simple meeting. It became a delicate balance between fascination and flight. As Apollo observed her, he began to notice the subtler details that mortals, and even lesser gods, might have overlooked. The light that glinted on her hair resembled morning sunlight filtering through leaves. The movement of her limbs was both deliberate and fluid, shaped by a life of freedom and solitude. Every glance she cast to the ground, every instinctive turn of her head, heightened his curiosity and desire. Yet there was no cruelty in her instinctual avoidance, only the natural response of someone determined to preserve autonomy in a world where divine attention could be overwhelming. Apollo, in this moment, recognized both the beauty and the challenge of his pursuit, though he could not yet comprehend the lengths to which it would extend. The forest itself seemed to participate in the tension, creating paths and obstacles that amplified the chase. Roots and branches became both guide and barrier, testing Apollo's patience and emphasizing Daphne's agility. Even as he moved closer, the world around them seemed suspended in a tableau of anticipation. The first glance, fleeting yet profound, had set into motion a series of events that would intertwine fate, desire, and divine intervention. Both god and nymph were caught in forces greater than themselves, each step forward revealing more about their natures. Apollo's unrelenting longing and Daphne's instinctive determination to remain free. This moment, suspended between curiosity and instinct, left a quiet question lingering in the dappled sunlight. Could the fire of desire awaken understanding and consent? Or would it only fuel a pursuit destined to end in transformation and the reshaping of both lives? The answer lay just beyond the next bend in the forest, waiting to unfold in the next chapter of their intertwined destinies. The initial encounter between Apollo and Daphne, subtle yet charged, gradually transformed into the first overt pursuit. The god, unable to contain the fire of desire ignited by Cupid's golden arrow, stepped fully into the forest in search of the nymph. His movements, though fluid and graceful, carried an urgency that contrasted sharply with Daphne's natural rhythm. Each step he took seemed to blur the line between admiration and insistence, a tension that would define their relationship from this moment onward. The forest, witness to countless stories of gods and mortals, seemed almost to hold its breath, as though it understood the delicate balance between pursuit and resistance unfolding within its depths. Daphne, meanwhile, remained guided by instinct and a deep-seated sense of autonomy. Though unaware of the full extent of Apollo's attention, she sensed a force pressing against the freedom she so carefully maintained. The subtle shift in the sounds around her, the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, even the distant flight of birds heightened her awareness. Her heart beat rapidly, not in longing but in an urgent determination to remain unclaimed, unbound, and unaltered by the overwhelming force of a god's desire. Every instinct, sharpened by the leaden arrow, urged her forward, away from the danger she could neither see nor fully comprehend. Apollo's fascination grew with every step. His admiration mingled with an almost desperate longing. He noticed the play of light on her hair, the sway of her form as she moved, and the air of purity that seemed to surround her. Yet, the closer he came, the more Daphne eluded him, guided by forces beyond either mortal or divine comprehension. This first close encounter revealed the limitations of power and beauty when confronted with instinct and autonomy. For Apollo, accustomed to mastery in both combat and influence, it was a lesson in the unpredictable nature of desire. No weapon, no boast, no argument could bend the will of someone determined to remain free. The forest, alive with the tension between pursuer and pursued, became a stage for the inevitable escalation. Apollo's steps echoed faintly against the undergrowth, and Daphne's flight carried her deeper into her sanctuary, marking the first tangible movement of the chase that would define their story. Every glance, every rustle, and every heartbeat was a reminder that desire and resistance exist not merely in isolation but in dynamic interplay, shaping actions, consequences, and, ultimately, transformation. As they moved through this sundown world, the first glance, the moment when admiration met instinct, had already sown the seeds of a tale that would endure for generations. It left one lingering question, quietly vibrating in the warm morning air. Could this initial meeting, so charged with fascination and avoidance, ever find resolution through understanding, or was the story destined to continue along a path of pursuit, fear, and the inevitable intervention of forces beyond their control? In that suspended moment, the answer remained hidden, awaiting the next chapter of their intertwined fates. The story of Apollo and Daphne cannot be told without understanding the subtle yet profound role of Cupid, the mischievous god of desire. In this moment, his influence was both unseen and undeniable, the invisible hand that would shape the fates of both god and nymph. It began with a simple act of retribution. Apollo's boast had wounded Cupid's pride, dismissing love as inconsequential compared to skill, strength, and divine mastery. Yet Cupid, with the patience and precision only a god of love could possess, responded not with anger but with strategy, wielding two arrows with contrasting purposes, one tipped with gold, destined to ignite irresistible longing, and the other tipped with lead, designed to repel desire entirely. The golden arrow found its mark in Apollo's heart, sparking a consuming obsession that would dominate his every thought. From the moment it struck, his desire for Daphne became urgent and unyielding, a fire that no caution, wisdom, or divine dignity could extinguish. He could not simply admire her from a distance. The golden arrow demanded pursuit, attention, and possession. Every instinct within him pulsed with intensity, every sense heightened as he tracked her movements through the forests and streams. Daphne's presence, once merely beautiful in passing, now overwhelmed Apollo, drawing him with a force as natural and unstoppable as the sun's own trajectory across the sky. In contrast, the leaden arrow had struck Daphne, ensuring that she recoiled from any spark of attraction. Her instincts became sharper, her movements swifter, and her awareness of potential danger heightened in ways she could not consciously explain. The golden light of Apollo's radiance, which might have inspired admiration or curiosity in another, now provoked fear and a flight response. Every glance he offered, every sound of pursuit, reinforced the instinctual message that she must escape. This duality, desire and avoidance, obsession and fear, was the essence of Cupid's design. A reminder that love, when manipulated by divine forces, could create tension as much as it inspired passion. The consequences of these invisible interventions were immediate and profound. Apollo's pursuit became relentless, driven by a compulsion he could neither resist nor fully understand. Daphne, meanwhile, navigated the forest with an instinctive alertness that allowed her to evade him at every turn, her fear sharpening her agility and resolve. In the quiet moments between rustling leaves and flowing streams, the opposing forces of desire and resistance clashed with a subtle intensity, shaping the trajectory of the chase. What might have been a fleeting encounter instead became a narrative of obsession and survival, orchestrated by the calculated precision of Cupid's arrows. This first interaction, framed by the divine manipulation of love itself, raises an enduring question about the nature of desire. When attraction is sparked by forces beyond understanding or consent, can it ever lead to genuine connection, or does it merely create an endless cycle of pursuit and fear? As Apollo pressed forward, and Daphne instinctively fled, the stage was set for a story where divine intervention, human awe, nymph instinct, and uncontrollable desire would collide, ultimately shaping the transformation that lay ahead. As the effects of Cupid's arrows unfolded, the forest became a stage for the invisible yet potent drama of desire and fear. Apollo's heart, set ablaze by the golden-tipped arrow, pulsed with an urgency that altered his very presence. Every breath he drew, every step he took, was now governed by an irresistible need to be near Daphne. He followed the sounds of her movement, the glimpses of her hair catching sunlight, and even the subtle impressions her passing left upon the foliage. For a god accustomed to mastery over both mortals and immortals, this was a humbling and consuming compulsion, a reminder that even divine power is vulnerable to the forces of love. Daphne, on the other hand, experienced a different kind of intensity. The leaden arrow that had struck her heart imbued her with an instinctual aversion, a deep-seated knowledge that any approach by Apollo could threaten the independence she valued above all else. The forest, familiar and safe, became a labyrinth of escape, each path chosen with careful deliberation, each bend and tree serving as a potential sanctuary. She did not understand fully why her fear was so acute, yet her instincts guided her, steps with precision and urgency. Every glance behind her, every rustle of leaves underfoot, intensified her resolve to remain free from the god's relentless pursuit. This tension between pursuit and flight created a rhythm that dominated the natural environment. Birds paused mid-song, the wind seemed to hush, and even the small creatures of the forest moved with heightened alertness, as if sensing the invisible force that governed the interaction between god and nymph. Apollo's obsession drew him closer, with every heartbeat, yet Daphne's fear and agility kept her just out of reach. It was a delicate, unspoken balance, a reminder of how desire, when amplified by divine intervention, can create a scenario of relentless tension rather than harmony. In this dynamic, Cupid's role becomes unmistakably clear. His arrows did not merely create attraction or aversion. They set into motion a sequence of events that highlighted the unpredictability of desire. Apollo's infatuation was no longer simply admiration. It was a consuming drive, a need that overrode reason and foresight. Daphne's avoidance was no longer casual. It was instinctively attuned to the threat of possession. The resulting chase illuminated the complexities of love in Greek mythology, a force capable of inspiring devotion, fear, and transformation. Simultaneously, as they moved through the forest, the consequences of divine manipulation became increasingly evident. The struggle between obsession and fear foreshadowed the ultimate resolution, hinting at the ways in which desire can both create and destroy. The arrows, though unseen, dictated the rhythm of their encounter, and the world around them responded in quiet acknowledgement. The question lingered, pressing and unrelenting, in a chase orchestrated by forces beyond comprehension. Is it ever possible for desire to be fulfilled without loss? Or does the act of pursuit itself guarantee a transformation neither participant could have predicted? The invisible influence of Cupid's arrows now dominated every motion, every heartbeat, and every thought in the unfolding chase. Apollo's desire had reached a fevered intensity. It was no longer admiration, but an unrelenting force driving him forward. Each glimpse of Daphne, fleeting and tantalizing, stoked the fire of longing within him, compelling him to close the distance with a combination of elegance and urgency only a god could maintain. Yet, with every step he advanced, Daphne's instinctive avoidance intensified, her movements becoming sharper, swifter, and more unpredictable. The golden arrow had bound Apollo to desire, and the leaden arrow had bound Daphne to fear, creating a tension that neither could escape. The forest itself seemed alive to this struggle. Trees, streams, and open glades became both playground and battleground, shaping the dynamics of pursuit and evasion. Apollo, despite his divine powers, could not force her to remain or to yield. Every act of brilliance and speed he displayed was countered by Daphne's natural agility and heightened instincts. Her awareness of danger, sharpened by Cupid's intervention, transformed her into a figure almost ethereal in her evasion. The chase, at once beautiful and tragic, was orchestrated not by chance, but by the meticulous design of a god who delighted in illustrating the paradoxical nature of love, irresistible yet unattainable, compelling yet uncontrollable. As the pursuit continued, the emotional landscape became as pronounced as the physical one. Apollo's obsession bordered on desperation, each moment of near contact fueling both awe and frustration. Daphne's fear, while protective, also carried an undertone of inevitability. She sensed that her freedom alone could not conclude this encounter. The duality of desire and resistance reached a point where their interaction transcended mere chase. It became a study in the limits of willpower, the consequences of pride, and the complexities of instinct versus longing. Cupid's role, though unseen, was the axis around which this drama revolved, demonstrating that even gods were susceptible to forces beyond their understanding. This phase of the story leaves the outcome suspended in anticipation. Apollo's obsession would not diminish, nor would Daphne's instinctive fear waver. Their destinies were bound together by the invisible strings of divine intervention, with every movement forward heightening the tension and the stakes. The golden and leaden arrows had set into motion a conflict that would not conclude until extraordinary circumstances intervened, culminating in a transformation that would alter the landscape of mythology forever. In the quiet of the forest, with sunlight filtering through leaves and the wind carrying the faintest whispers of movement, one question lingered. Could desire, so intensely stirred, ever reconcile with freedom, or would the pursuit itself demand a resolution that neither longing nor instinct could achieve on its own? The answer, hidden within the folds of myth and nature, awaited the next stage of the story, promising a climax that would forever define the relationship between Apollo and Daphne. With the first glances exchanged and Cupid's arrows firmly in place, the stage was set for a chase that would become legendary in Greek mythology. Apollo, driven by the golden arrow's insistent pull, moved with a speed and determination that few could match. Every fiber of his being focused on Daphne, whose form danced just ahead of him through the dense forest. The god's golden hair caught sunlight like molten threads, and his every step was measured and precise, yet propelled by the growing fire of desire. He had faced monsters, rival gods, and the unpredictable whims of fate itself. Yet nothing had demanded the intensity, patience, and obsession that this pursuit now required. Daphne, guided by the leaden arrow and her own instincts, moved with a combination of elegance and urgency. She did not merely run. She navigated the forest with intimate knowledge of every root, stone, and stream. Her breaths came quickly but controlled, her movements flowing seamlessly with the rhythm of the natural world. Fear was her guide, pushing her forward even as her mind tried to understand the nature of the unseen force following her. The wind carried her hair across her face, and the soft sounds of her passage over grass and leaves formed an intricate pattern that Apollo followed with the precision of both a hunter and a word-ship. As the chase intensified, the environment became a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Birds took flight from the treetops, startled by the rapid movement through their midst. Streams reflected the sunlight in fragments, mirroring the urgency and the tension of the moment. Even the forest floor seemed to shift underfoot, creating subtle obstacles and openings that guided the path of both pursuer and pursued. Each movement of Daphne was deliberate yet instinctive, a testament to her agility and the protective influence of Cupid's leaden arrow. Every glance Apollo stole of her fleeing form amplified the fire within him, his longing deepening with every near contact that remained just out of reach. This chase was not merely physical, it was symbolic, a manifestation of desire and resistance. Intertwined, Apollo's relentless pursuit represented obsession, the uncontrollable force of desire that could sweep even a god into desperation. Daphne's flight embodied autonomy, the instinctual defense of freedom in the face of overpowering temptation. Their interaction highlighted a tension that resonates beyond mythology, reflecting the eternal struggle between pursuit and evasion, longing and self-preservation, compulsion and instinct. The first steps of this chase set a pattern that would define the story. The closer Apollo came, the more determined Daphne became to evade him, and the more she fled, the stronger his obsession grew. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind, and every breaking of twigs underfoot became part of the rhythm of pursuit, creating a narrative of desire and fear, tension and beauty. It left a lingering question, pressing and unresolved, in a chase driven by forces beyond comprehension. How far could desire go before it met the ultimate limit of resistance? As Apollo pressed forward, the intensity of the pursuit escalated with every heartbeat. The god, radiant and determined, was now fully consumed by desire, his mind entirely focused on Daphne's form ahead, her figure weaving through the forest, with swift and calculated movements, became an almost hypnotic vision for him, igniting a longing that was both painful and intoxicating. Apollo's usual composure, forged through centuries of mastery over prophecy, music, and combat, faltered under the weight of this new obsession. He could not simply admire from afar. Every instinct demanded that he close the distance, that he bridge the gap between longing and possession, even as the forest itself tested his persistence. Daphne's flight was guided by instinct, the leaden arrow ensuring her heart recoiled from the god's approach. She moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural, her awareness of every obstacle and every potential hiding place heightened to a level that surpassed ordinary perception. The gentle sway of branches, the rustle of leaves underfoot, and the soft murmurs of distant streams became markers in her path, each step deliberate and yet fluid. Her senses were attuned to the faintest shifts in the forest, the subtle indications of Apollo's progress behind her. The urgency of her escape was matched by a calm precision born of innate survival instincts, ensuring that she remained just beyond the god's reach. The forest itself seemed to respond to the chase, a silent accomplice to the tension between pursuer and pursued. Sunlight filtered through leaves in shifting patterns, creating patches of shadow that both aided and obstructed movement. Roots and rocks became natural obstacles, testing Apollo's agility and Daphne's ability to evade. Capture. Birds scattered in sudden flight, and even the flowing streams seemed to quicken in a whispering chorus of anticipation. Each detail of the environment enhanced the drama of the pursuit, amplifying both Apollo's obsession and Daphne's fear, embedding the chase within the very fabric of the natural world. This sequence of pursuit and evasion was more than a simple game of speed. It was a reflection of deeper forces at work. Apollo's desire, amplified by Cupid's golden arrow, was relentless, pushing him to heights of intensity he had never experienced. Daphne's instinctual avoidance, sharpened by the leaden arrow, became a protective shield, preserving her freedom against overwhelming odds. Their interaction highlighted the interplay of power, longing, and resistance, emphasizing that even gods could be ensnared by forces beyond their understanding, and that the will to remain autonomous could shape destiny in ways as profound as divine intervention. As the chase continued deeper into the forest, one question hung in the air like the faint rustle of leaves. How long could Apollo sustain his relentless pursuit? And how far could Daphne run before the forces at play as fear and the unseen hand of Cupid demanded a resolution neither could anticipate? Every step carried them closer to an outcome that would forever transform their lives. Yet the answer remained tantalizingly out of reach, hidden in the tension of pursuit and evasion. The chase reached its peak intensity as Apollo closed the distance, his desire sharpening into a relentless urgency. The god's every movement was a blend of divine grace and pressing need. His golden form moved through the forest like sunlight spilling over the undergrowth, drawing him ever closer to Daphne. The pursuit was no longer a simple act of had become an all-consuming obsession, a force that eclipsed reason, patience, and foresight. Even the most measured movements of Apollo now carried the weight of desire, made almost unbearable by its sudden intensity. Daphne, sensing the narrowing space between them, relied on the instincts sharpened by the leaden arrow. Her steps became a rapid, fluid motion, weaving around trees and streams with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. Every turn, every leap, and every glance behind her was guided by an acute awareness of the god's pursuit. The forest, that had once been a quiet refuge, now became a dynamic arena, shaping the trajectory of the chase. Twisting roots, low-hanging branches, and rushing waters were all obstacles she navigated with instinctual skill, each providing fleeting protection from the god, whose longing could not be tamed. The emotional tension of the chase mirrored the physical struggle. Apollo's longing intensified with each step, transforming admiration into desperation. The nearer he came, the more Daphne's fear and determination drove her forward, just out of reach. Their interaction created a rhythm of pursuit and evasion that was as mesmerizing as it was tragic. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs amplified the interplay between desire and autonomy, highlighting a fundamental truth of their story, that obsession, no matter how divine, must contend with the will of another. As the chase progressed, it became increasingly clear that ordinary means would not resolve the pursuit. Apollo's desire, powerful and consuming, could not force Daphne to yield. Daphne's instinct, guided by fear and protective arrows, could not allow her to stop. This impasse set the stage for forces beyond either participant to intervene, foreshadowing the transformation that would ultimately define their story. The tension was not just physical, it was symbolic, representing the collision of desire and freedom, pursuit and autonomy, divine obsession and mortal or nymph resistance. In the midst of this relentless chase, a question lingered with increasing weight. Could Apollo's obsession ever be satisfied without infringing on Daphne's autonomy? Or was the pursuit itself destined to culminate in a transformation that neither desire nor fear could fully control? Each step, each glance, and each breath carried the story forward, weaving together the threads of longing, resistance, and the inexorable influence of forces beyond comprehension. The chase, both beautiful and inevitable, had set them on a path whose resolution would echo through myth for generations, leaving observers to ponder the delicate balance between desire, freedom, and the consequences of divine intervention. The forest, once a sanctuary of calm and familiarity for Daphne, now became a labyrinth of urgency and instinct. Her heart pounded as she sprinted through the undergrowth, branches whipping past her face, roots threatening to trip her delicate steps. Each breath was sharp and purposeful, every movement guided by an almost preternatural awareness of the presence pursuing her. Fear had become her constant companion, a force as immediate and commanding as the wind rustling through the trees. The leaden arrow, invisible but potent, ensured that her instincts were primed to evade rather than to linger or examine. She ran not merely to escape, but because to stop was unthinkable. Every pause would give Apollo an opening, every hesitation a chance for desire to become possession. The urgency of her flight was heightened by the sheer intensity of Apollo's pursuit. Radiant and unyielding, the god moved with a speed that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. His golden form appeared almost ethereal against the deep greens and browns of the forest. Every step measured yet propelled by insistent longing. He had never known desire like this sun obsession that consumed not only thought, but every sense, every awareness. The closer he came, the more Daphne's flight became a reflection of his obsession, her fear sharpening in direct proportion to the intensity of his desire. This interplay created a rhythm, almost musical in its tension, a dance of evasion and pursuit conducted by invisible strings of divine influence. Every detail of the forest seemed to echo Daphne's panic. Leaves whispered underfoot, twigs snapped in warning, and the streams that cut across her path gurgled and shimmered in the dappled sunlight, forming both obstacles and markers in her desperate escape. She knew the terrain intimately, every hill, every hollow, every hidden glade, yet the fear of the god's approach made even familiar ground seem treacherous. Her hands brushed against bark and brambles as she moved, and the sound of her own rapid breathing mingled with the distant rustle of Apollo's pursuit. There was no thought of confrontation or parley. Instinct demanded flight, pure and uncompromising. This moment of panic also revealed Daphne's resilience and intelligence. She relied not merely on speed, but on strategy, weaving through the forest in patterns designed to confuse and delay, using every element of the natural environment to her advantage. Her mind, heightened by fear, calculated paths that maximized cover and minimized exposure, turning the forest into an ally even as it tested her endurance. Yet, despite all her efforts, she was painfully aware that her freedom rested on a precarious balance. The god's obsession could not be easily outrun, and her instinctual advantage might not last indefinitely. As Daphne fled, a question hovered. Unspoken in the dappled shadows of the forest, could instinct and fear alone preserve autonomy against a relentless divine pursuit? Or was her freedom destined to end in a transformation beyond her control? Each rapid step, each sharp turn, each glance over her shoulder carried her further into uncertainty. The tension between desire and evasion shaping not only her immediate fate, but the myth that would endure for centuries. Daphne's flight became increasingly frantic as the forest stretched before her, twisting and turning like a living maze. Her limbs moved with tireless determination, each step carefully measured to avoid obstacles while maintaining speed. Fear surged through her veins, sharp and unrelenting, guiding her through familiar paths now transformed into a corridor of urgency. She knew that hesitation would be fatal. Apollo's relentless pursuit, fueled by the golden arrow of Cupid, allowed him to close distances in moments that seemed eternal to her. Every rustle of leaves, every broken twig beneath his step, heightened her senses, reminding her of the narrow margins separating freedom from capture. The intensity of her panic was mirrored by the relentless radiance of Apollo behind her. The god moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost inhuman, every step perfectly calculated to bring him closer. Desire, which had once been a gentle admiration, had become an obsession so consuming that he'd no longer considered restraint or propriety. Each glance at Daphne intensified his pursuit. Every movement of her form provoked a near unbearable longing, a need that pressed against the limits of his divine patience. The forest, alive with shadow and light, became the arena for this interplay between compulsion and avoidance, as the rhythm of pursuit and evasion reached a fevered pitch. Despite her fear, Daphne's mind remained sharp and resourceful. She navigated streams, leaped over fallen logs, and twisted through narrow gaps between trees, using every element of the forest to slow Apollo's advance. Her knowledge of the terrain allowed her to anticipate obstacles and exploit them to her advantage. Yet, the pressure of fear, combined with the sheer force of the god's obsession, created a tension that threatened to overwhelm even her considerable instincts. Every decision carried consequences. Every misstep could bring the relentless golden figure closer, tightening the invisible net around her. The chase, while physical, also had a psychological dimension. Daphne's panic heightened her awareness, forcing her to read subtle signs in the environment shifts in sunlight sounds of displaced foliage, the whisper of wind through the branches as indicators of Apollo's approach. Her fear, though primal, also sharpened her faculties, transforming her into a participant in a game where survival and autonomy were inseparable. She relied not only on speed but on intuition, and every rapid heartbeat reinforced the urgency of her flight as the forest thickened and shadows lengthened. A question hung over Daphne's desperate flight. Could instinct and cunning alone maintain freedom against an unyielding divine force, or would the relentless nature of desire eventually demand a resolution beyond her control? The tension between pursuit and evasion, between fear and desire, continued to shape their encounter, hinting at the extraordinary transformation that loomed just beyond the next bend in the forest. Daphne's flight through the forest reached a crescendo as exhaustion threatened to overtake her agility. Her muscles burned, her lungs drew sharp, rapid breaths, Yet instinct propelled her forward, sharper and faster than ever. Each step was a balance between speed and precision, her mind calculating the safest path through the labyrinthine woods, while her body responded with fluid grace. The leaden arrow of Cupid had ensured that her fear was a shield, a protective instinct stronger than conscious thought, driving her away from Apollo's unrelenting pursuit. She could not slow down. To pause was to risk surrender, and her freedom depended entirely on maintaining the rhythm of her desperate flight. Behind her, Apollo's obsession surged with equal force. The golden arrow had consumed his reason, sharpening every sense to focus entirely on Daphne. Every glimpse of her moving form intensified the fire in his heart, transforming admiration into a near unbearable compulsion. He leaped over fallen logs, skirted around trees, and navigated streams with a fluidity that seemed beyond mortal comprehension. Yet, despite his godly speed and strength, Daphne remained just ahead, her natural agility and fear-driven instincts allowing her to evade capture. The forest itself seemed to conspire with her, roots and rocks becoming temporary barriers that slowed the relentless god without halting her progress. The pursuit had become a test not only of speed but of endurance, instinct, and resolve. Daphne's fear sharpened her awareness, forcing her to detect even the slightest change in sound or shadow, anticipating Apollo's approach before he could fully reveal it. Each step required the careful coordination of mind and body, balancing immediate action with strategic planning. Her flight was a dance between desperation and clarity, instinct and intellect, revealing the extraordinary adaptability of one whose freedom was at stake against a seemingly unstoppable force. Emotionally, the chase highlighted a stark contrast between desire and autonomy. Apollo's obsession, powerful and consuming, could not account for Daphne's fierce determination to remain unclaimed. Every moment of near contact heightened the tension, reinforcing the dynamic between pursuit and evasion that would ultimately define their story. The interaction underscored a fundamental principle of their myth, that desire, no matter how intense, encounters limits when confronted with an unyielding will, and that even divine power may be constrained by forces beyond its control. As the forest thickened and the sunlight dappled the ground in shifting patterns, one lingering question remained, echoing through the trees with every heartbeat and rustle of leaves. Could Daphne's instinctive fear, sharpened and relentless, preserve her autonomy against a pursuit governed by divine obsession? Or would the inexorable force of desire ultimately demand a resolution that would forever alter the lives of both nymph and god? In that moment, as feet pounded the earth and the chase carried them deeper into the wilderness, the answer remained suspended, poised to unfold in the final, transformative moments of their intertwined destinies. As Daphne fled through the dense forest, nature itself became both a sanctuary and a labyrinth. Trees, with their gnarled roots and wide-reaching branches, offered cover from Apollo's relentless gaze. Every trunk was a potential shield, every shadow a momentary respite. She weaved through the undergrowth with precision, pressing close to moss-covered boulders or ducking behind thickets where sunlight barely touched the forest floor. The natural world, silent and impartial, provided her with the means to maintain autonomy, giving her instincts the upper hand even as the gods' pursuit pressed onward. The forest, for centuries home to countless creatures and untold stories, now witnessed a tension between mortal awe, in this case, nymph fleeing, and divine desire. Streams, trickling and gurgling through hidden valleys, became both obstacle and refuge. Daphne jumped over shallow waters and skirted along slippery banks, using the reflective surface to gauge Apollo's approach. The water, cool and clear, offered temporary distraction, splitting her reflection in fragmented shards that momentarily concealed her presence. It was in these brief pauses by flowing streams that Daphne could gather herself, steady her breath, and prepare for the next phase of her flight. Each stream was not just a physical barrier, but a psychological one, a subtle reminder of the boundary between her freedom and the god's desire. The hiding places embedded in the landscape further aided Daphne. Hollowed tree trunks, clusters of ferns, and small depressions in the forest floor became temporary sanctuaries. She learned to read the environment with heightened perception. A sudden rustle of leaves, a shift in the wind, or the glint of sunlight on water signaled the presence of pursuit. Her instinct for evasion, sharpened by Cupid's leaden arrow, turned every element of the forest into a tool for survival. Each hiding place, no matter how small, contributed to a rhythm of concealment and movement, a delicate balance between remaining unseen and continuing forward. Apollo, radiant and focused, pursued with intensity. Yet even his godly abilities were challenged by the complexity of the terrain. Trees blocked direct lines of sight, streams disrupted fluid motion, and uneven ground forced careful navigation. The god's frustration grew as Daphne's familiarity with the forest allowed her to exploit every natural feature to her advantage. Her flight was more than speed. It was strategy, intuition, and communion with the natural world. The forest became an ally, amplifying her instincts while simultaneously testing her endurance. This interaction highlighted a subtle but powerful truth. Nature can act as both shield and guide, a sanctuary for those seeking autonomy. Daphne's use of trees, streams, and hidden spaces illustrates how survival is often as much about environment as it is about strength or speed. It prompts a lingering question. Could the forest, vast and intricate though it was, ultimately provide a refuge sufficient to counter the relentless pursuit of a god? Or was there a limit to what even instinct and the natural world could accomplish? The answer remained uncertain, suspended in the shadows and dappled sunlight of the woodland, waiting to reveal itself in the next stage of the story. Daphne's flight through the forest increasingly relied on her intimate knowledge of the landscape. Each tree, each winding path, each hidden nook offered more than a physical advantage. They provided psychological relief, a momentary sense of control in the midst of chaos. She pressed herself against the rough bark of towering oaks to catch her breath, crouched behind ferns, when Apollo's golden presence gleamed briefly through the foliage, and slid into shallow hollows to let the sounds of pursuit fade. The forest had become a complex map of survival, a living guide that responded to every shift in movement and every beat of her heart. Streams proved particularly useful, creating natural interruptions in Apollo's pursuit. Water trickled over, stones forming pools and barriers that slowed the god's approach, forcing him to navigate carefully rather than charge forward with unrestrained speed. Daphne moved along these waterways with calculated agility, using the subtle unevenness of the banks to her advantage. The reflections of sunlight on the surface of the water fragmented her image, making it harder for Apollo to track her precisely. These interactions between natural elements and instinct allowed Daphne to temporarily outpace a god whose desire was as persistent as it was consuming. Hiding places, though often small and limited, became critical instruments of evasion. Daphne slipped into clusters of thick underbrush and behind low-lying rocks, learning to blend with her surroundings. Each pause allowed her to listen, to feel the vibrations of the forest floor, and to anticipate Apollo's next move. Her fear, sharpened by the leaden arrow, enhanced her perception, turning ordinary features of the landscape into strategic assets. Even in moments when exhaustion threatened, she found strength in the environment, drawing both physical support and a psychological edge from the shelter and concealment it offered. Apollo's pursuit, radiant and relentless, was challenged by these natural advantages. The density of trees, the unevenness of the terrain, and the interweaving streams required him to adjust continuously. He could not simply rely on divine speed or power. He needed patience, focus, and adaptability. Yet, even as obstacles slowed him, his obsession never wavered. The golden arrow had bound his desire to Daphne, and each temporary advantage she gained only intensified the urgency of his pursuit. The forest, while aiding Daphne, became a test of his resolve, a reminder that even gods could be influenced and restrained by their environment. This chapter of their story emphasizes a powerful truth. Survival is often as much about awareness and adaptation as it is about speed or strength. Daphne's reliance on trees, streams, and hidden spaces illustrates how a deep connection to nature can provide both protection and insight, even against overwhelming odds. Yet it also raises a pressing question. Could the forest's shelter and her own ingenuity ultimately be enough to resist the relentless power of desire? Or would the inexorable force of pursuit eventually find its way through every barrier nature provided? The answer remains suspended in the shifting light and shadow of the woodland, teasing the next turn of events. As the pursuit deepened, Daphne found herself moving into increasingly dense parts of the forest, where sunlight barely touched the forest floor and the air was thick with the scent of moss and damp earth. The trees towered overhead, their branches interlacing to form a canopy that fragmented Apollo's golden light into scattered beams. Each shadow became a temporary shield, each narrow path a means of concealment. Daphne pressed herself into these spaces, using the intricacy of the terrain to extend the distance between herself and the god whose desire seemed limitless. Nature, in all its complexity, became her silent ally, offering protection where speed and endurance alone might have failed. Streams and small brooks continued to play a pivotal role in her escape. Daphne followed the winding waterways, hopping over stones and slipping along slippery banks, using the water's reflective surface to obscure her movement. Occasionally, she paused at the edges of these streams, crouching low to catch her breath, and listen for the subtle sound of pursuit. The forest's natural features, its uneven ground, its pockets of concealment acted in concert with her instincts, allowing her to manipulate the environment in ways that a simple flight could never achieve. Every trick of terrain and shadow extended her autonomy, buying her precious moments against the persistent force of Apollo's obsession. Yet, even as the forest provided refuge, the challenge intensified. Apollo's radiant form wove through the dense woodland with divine agility, adjusting to obstacles with uncanny precision. Fallen logs, clusters of ferns, and tight hollows were temporary hindrances, not permanent barriers. The closer Daphne approached the heart of the forest, the more the natural world demanded careful navigation, and the more critical every decision became. One wrong step could compromise her advantage, allowing the relentless god to close in. Her flight was no longer merely instinct. It required calculation, adaptation, and constant awareness of both the environment and the ever-present threat behind her. The interaction between flight and environment underscored a profound aspect of the myth. Survival is rarely a matter of power alone. Daphne's ability to use nature as refuge demonstrates how awareness, strategy, and intimate knowledge of the surroundings can shape outcomes, even against overwhelming odds. Her autonomy depended as much on the forest's features as on her own physical and mental abilities, turning the landscape into an active participant in the narrative. Amid the dense trees and flowing streams, a lingering question arose. Could Daphne's ingenuity and the protection offered by the forest ultimately ensure her freedom? Or would Apollo's obsession, unyielding and unstoppable, penetrate every layer of refuge she could find? The answer remained suspended in the interplay of light and shadow, water and stone, as nature itself held its breath in anticipation of the transformation yet to come. Daphne's flight, swift and desperate, eventually brought her to the banks of a familiar river. The waters, glinting with sunlight and murmuring over stones, marked a boundary between the safety of the forest and the wider world beyond. Her chest heaved with exertion, her heart pounded in her ears, and for the first time, the need for intervention beyond mere speed and concealment became apparent. She realized that evasion alone might not suffice against a god whose desire was relentless. In her desperation, her thoughts turned to her father, Peneus, the river god, whose power over the waters could offer protection and perhaps an escape from the inexorable pursuit of Apollo. Calling out to him, her voice trembled but carried through, the trees echoing against the trunks and the rippling stream. "Father," she cried, "help me. Apollo pursues me, relentless and unyielding. Shield me from his desire." The plea was both a prayer and an acknowledgement of her limits. Despite her extraordinary instincts, the situation demanded more than agility, foresight, or even the forest's assistance. It required the intervention of another divine force, one whose influence could alter the course of events and provide a sanctuary beyond her own capabilities. Peneus, hearing his daughter's cry, responded with the concern and urgency characteristic of a protective parent. The river god, whose currents shaped the landscape and whose waters nourished the surrounding forest, understood the magnitude of the threat. His daughter's autonomy was at stake, and the relentless pursuit of Apollo, powered by a golden arrow, could not be resisted by ordinary means. The river god's thoughts raced as he considered the options available within his domain. Could the waters themselves conceal her? Could branches, reeds, or hidden riverbanks serve as temporary protection? The urgency of the situation pressed him to act swiftly, for every passing moment increased the risk of capture. In this moment, the narrative highlights a significant dynamic in Greek mythology: the interplay between divine power and mortal law, semi-divinagency. Daphne's instincts and agility, though extraordinary, were insufficient against Apollo's obsession. Peneus' intervention demonstrated that survival often required alliances, protection, and timely aid from those whose influence extended beyond immediate physical ability. The river god's presence was not simply a source of strength. It represented hope, strategy, and a potential turning point in the unfolding chase. Yet, the moment was filled with uncertainty. Apollo's pursuit was relentless, and while Peneus' domain offered opportunities for concealment or transformation, the outcome remained far from guaranteed. The interplay of desire, fear, and intervention created a tense suspense, a balance between pursuit and refuge that could shift with the slightest misstep. Daphne's plea, urgent and sincere, underscored both her vulnerability and her resourcefulness. She recognized when to rely on instinct and when to invoke the power of another dot. As she waited, breathless and tense, a lingering question hung in the air. Could her father's protection truly shield her from a god's obsession? Or would divine desire find a way to circumvent even the intervention of a powerful river deity? The answer remained suspended, awaiting the next turn of events in a story defined by pursuit, fear, and the forces that govern fate itself. Peneus, stirred by his daughter's desperate cries, immediately assessed the landscape surrounding the river, the water's currents, the reeds along the banks, and the gentle rise of the forest floor presented him with both obstacles and opportunities. He understood that the intervention required had to be swift and decisive, for Apollo's pursuit was relentless, powered by a divine arrow that ensured desire could not easily be denied. Daphne, though fleet and agile, could not outrun a god indefinitely. Peneus' mind raced through possibilities, balancing the immediate need for concealment with the longer-term necessity of ensuring his daughter's autonomy and safety. Daphne's voice, trembling yet resolute, continued to plead for protection. Her desperation underscored the intensity of the situation. She had relied on instinct and the forest's natural refuge for as long as possible. Yet the relentless nature of Apollo's pursuit had forced her to seek help beyond herself. The river god's response was swift. The waters began to churn subtly, currents shifting to create barriers and obstacles. Branches and reeds moved as if guided by an unseen hand, forming intricate patterns that could obscure her path and momentarily impede Apollo's progress. Nature itself, acting through the will of Peneus, became an instrument of protection, a reminder that divine forces often intersected in moments of tension, creating outcomes that balanced power, desire, and autonomy. Even as these interventions unfolded, Apollo's pursuit did not waver. He moved with grace and determination, each step bringing him closer, each glance of the forest and water fueling his obsession. Yet the subtle shifts in terrain and the carefully orchestrated assistance from Peneus forced him to adjust, testing not just his speed but his adaptability. For the first time in this pursuit, Apollo encountered resistance that was not purely physical. The environment itself, guided by paternal concern and divine influence, imposed constraints on his relentless desire. The dynamic between pursuer and pursued deepened, illustrating a broader truth in mythology. Even gods encounter limits when confronted by the intervention of others, especially those acting with both knowledge and care. Daphne, aware of her father's subtle actions, felt a temporary relief. She could sense the currents guiding her movement, the forest aiding her navigation, and the strategic concealment provided by reeds and underbrush. These interventions did not eliminate fear or remove the relentless chase, but they offered precious moments of reprieve, opportunities to regain composure, and time to consider further steps. The interplay of divine aid and instinctive evasion highlighted the delicate balance of survival. Each advantage could shift the trajectory of the pursuit, yet no intervention guaranteed absolute safety. As she continued to flee, a pressing question lingered in the air. Could the intervention of a powerful father and the forces of nature ultimately ensure Daphne's autonomy against Apollo's consuming desire? Or was her fate destined to be determined by an event even more extraordinary and irreversible? The answer hovered in the tension between pursuit, protection, and the forces shaping destiny, setting the stage for the transformative conclusion that awaited both nymph and god. As Apollo's golden figure drew nearer, The tension reached an almost unbearable intensity. Daphne, her chest heaving and legs straining, clung to the hope that her father's intervention could protect her. The waters of Peneus River swirled with a new purpose, rippling and eddying as if responding to the urgency of her plight. Reeds shifted to create natural screens. Branches bent in her path to obscure her form, and pools of water reflected fragmented images that confused the pursuer. In this moment, the river and the forest became one intricate instrument of refuge, designed to prolong Daphne's freedom and amplify her chance of evading capture. Apollo, relentless and enthralled, pressed forward with unyielding determination. The golden arrow of Cupid had bound his desire, transforming admiration into obsession. Yet even his divine abilities met subtle resistance. Currents shifted beneath his feet. Roots rose unexpectedly, and the forest's protective structures delayed his approach. The pursuit was no longer merely a contest of speed or strength. It was an intricate interplay between divine will, natural cunning, and paternal intervention. Every step, every leap, every glance required the god to adapt, highlighting that even deities are not immune to the influence of circumstance, strategy, and the protective instinct of others. Daphne, feeling the subtle currents and shifts orchestrated by her father, sensed the growing edge between hope and desperation. These fleeting moments of shelter allowed her to regain balance, to measure her next steps, and to maintain the rhythm of her flight. Yet she knew that these advantages were temporary, delicate, and dependent on the constant vigilance of her instincts and the responsiveness of the natural world. The river's protection was formidable but not infallible. Every second was borrowed, every pause a potential turning point in the pursuit. Her autonomy hung in the balance, shaped not just by her own decisions but by the careful orchestration of forces beyond her immediate control. This moment in the myth underscores the complex interplay between fear, protection, and desire. Daphne's reliance on her father's intervention illustrates the necessity of seeking aid when survival exceeds the capacity of one's own abilities. It demonstrates that even in a world governed by gods and fate, strategy, environment, and alliances play a critical role. Yet it also highlights the limits of such aid. Divine pursuit, especially when fueled by obsession, cannot be fully countered by ordinary means alone. As Daphne prepared for the next phase of her escape, one question remained suspended in the air. Could the protective power of Peneus and the forest ultimately safeguard her from Apollo's relentless pursuit? Or was there a force, even greater one, that would transform her in ways irreversible and eternal? The answer would not emerge from simple speed or strategy, but from a turning point that would redefine her existence, marking the boundary between freedom, desire, and divine intervention. As the forest and river provided their final barriers, Daphne's flight reached a point where instinct alone could no longer guarantee her safety. Apollo, radiant and unrelenting, drew ever closer, his desire burning with divine intensity. Every muscle in Daphne's body strained with exhaustion, her mind racing for any possibility of freedom. It was in this moment of desperation, when evasion had reached its limits, that the forces of nature and divine intervention converged to offer a resolution unlike any other transformation. The forest, her sanctuary, and her father, Peneus, who had guided her through the labyrinth of escape, now became the instruments through which Daphne could achieve an autonomy beyond mere flight. Daphne's plea to her father had been urgent and unwavering, a cry that transcended her nymph. Peneus, responding with both paternal instinct and divine power, enacted a solution that altered the course of her existence. Slowly, Almost imperceptibly at first, Daphne felt her form begin to change. Her legs, weary from the ceaseless pursuit, fused into the steady trunk of a young laurel tree. Her arms stretched upward, twisting into supple branches, and her hair transformed into delicate, rustling leaves. The sensation was both frightening and liberating. Daphne was leaving her physical form behind, escaping the immediate threat of Apollo's desire, while merging with the natural world that had long been her ally. The transformation was not only physical but symbolic. By becoming the laurel, Daphne achieved a form of freedom that could not be violated, a permanent refuge from the obsessive pursuit that had defined the earlier phases of her flight. The golden arrow of Cupid, which had bound Apollo's desire, could not compel the branches and leaves to yield her. The chase had reached its extraordinary conclusion. The laurel's presence in the forest and along the riverbanks served as a testament to the interplay between human awe, nymphly autonomy, and divine influence, illustrating how desperate circumstances can give rise to transformations that transcend ordinary existence. Apollo arrived too late to prevent the change. His longing, intense and consuming, collided with a reality he could not alter. In place of the nymph he had pursued, there now stood a laurel tree, serene yet eternally connected to her flight. His frustration was palpable, but the transformation also compelled admiration. Daphne had found an ingenious, if extraordinary, solution to preserve her freedom. The laurel became a symbol, a reminder of the delicate balance between desire, autonomy, and divine intervention, and it would forever carry the story of pursuit, evasion, and ultimate escape. As Daphne settled into this new form, a lingering question emerged: could freedom, once achieved through such radical transformation, carry its own form of isolation and permanence? Or was the laurel's existence a triumph of autonomy over desire, uniting refuge with enduring legacy? The answer rested in the quiet rustle of leaves, the bending of branches in the wind, and the eternal reminder that some escapes are permanent, shaped by both fear and ingenuity, and immortalized in the natural world itself. The moment of transformation carried with it both relief and an uncanny stillness. Daphne, now rooted as the laurel, felt the exhaustion of her flight fade, replaced by a strange permanence. Her body, once driven by fear and rapid motion, had surrendered to the steady growth and resilience of the tree. Each branch extended upward toward the sky, her leaves rustling gently with the breeze, creating a rhythm that was both soothing and eternal. The river beside her, still flowing with the guidance of Peneus, whispered of protection and continuity, reinforcing that her escape was not merely physical but deeply entwined with the enduring power of nature itself. Apollo, upon witnessing the transformation, experienced a profound mixture of frustration and awe. The golden arrow had ignited desire, compelling pursuit beyond reason. Yet the transformation was a boundary he could not cross. His longing, so intense and consuming, collided with an immutable reality. Daphne had transcended the human or nymph form, securing autonomy that no desire could penetrate. The laurel, both familiar and transformed, stood as an emblem of victory for evasion and preservation. In that moment, Apollo's pursuit was halted not by speed, cunning, or temporary concealment, but by an extraordinary act of divine and natural intervention that forever reshaped the course of the story. This transformation also highlights a broader symbolic resonance in mythology. The laurel became more than a refuge. It became a representation of the interplay between desire and autonomy, pursuit and protection. By merging with the natural world, Daphne not only preserved her freedom, but also demonstrated the profound limits of even divine compulsion. The forest, the river, and her father's intervention were all essential elements. Yet the culmination, the ultimate escape, was a transformation that placed her beyond reach. The laurel, with its enduring leaves and steadfast presence, would forever carry the memory of that desperate flight, immortalizing both her ingenuity and her determination. The aftermath of the transformation carried a quiet intensity. Apollo, compelled by desire yet confronted by permanence, could only circle the laurel, tracing its branches with longing and regret. In myth, this moment marks the tension between inevitability and agency. Desire cannot always achieve possession, and sometimes survival demands an extraordinary, irreversible solution. Daphne's flight, now concluded through transformation, emphasizes how autonomy and ingenuity can confront even the most persistent forces of pursuit, leaving behind a symbol that carries meaning far beyond the immediate story. A question lingered, echoing through the forest and along the flowing river. Could the laurel's existence, a perfect refuge from the relentless god, serve as a timeless testament to the power of autonomy? Or did it carry its own form of isolation, separating Daphne from the world she once knew? This tension between freedom and permanence, between safety and solitude, would endure as a central motif in the myth, shaping the way generations understood pursuit, desire, and the extraordinary lengths one might go to preserve oneself. With the final act of transformation complete, Daphne's flight concluded in a way that no speed, cunning, or even divine intervention could have achieved alone. Rooted as the laurel tree, she became immovable, serene, and eternally protected. The exhaustion, panic, and fear that had fueled her desperate evasion faded, replaced by a steady, enduring presence. Her leaves whispered in the wind, each rustle a reminder of the path she had taken, the pursuit she had endured, and the extraordinary measure she had taken to secure freedom. Nature itself had become her shield and sanctuary, an ally that had allowed her to survive the overwhelming desire of a god whose pursuit had seemed inescapable. Apollo, confronted with the laurel, stood in stunned reverence. The golden arrow of Cupid had ensured that his desire burned with an intensity beyond reason, yet it could not compel the tree to yield what had become untouchable. In that moment, his longing collided with reality in a way both humbling and transformative. The laurel's branches, leaves, and steady trunk offered a tangible symbol of Daphne's autonomy, a permanent reminder that desire alone cannot conquer will and ingenuity. Even divine obsession met its limits here, revealing that pursuit, however relentless, can be halted through a combination of cunning, courage, and intervention beyond immediate control. This culmination of the myth also carries deep symbolic resonance. The laurel, forever associated with Apollo through wreaths and poetic tradition, became a living emblem of victory and reverence. Yet it also carried the story of autonomy and escape. Daphne's flight, her father's intervention, and the forest's protection combined in a narrative that illustrates the extraordinary lengths one might go to preserve freedom. In transforming, she not only evaded a relentless god, but also secured a place in the cultural and symbolic imagination, where the laurel would forever represent both pursuit and evasion, desire and restraint. The laurel's enduring presence highlights an essential truth about the myth. Freedom sometimes demands transformation beyond ordinary means. What began as a frantic flight through forest and river concluded in a radical, permanent solution. Daphne's clever use of her environment, her instincts, and her father's aid culminated in a resolution that was both protective and symbolic. The pursuit could no longer continue, and the nymph who had fled in fear now stood immortalized in a form that both preserved her life and transformed it, bridging the mortal and divine realms as the wind stirred through the laurel's branches. A question lingered, subtle yet profound. Does ultimate freedom always require a radical change, an irreversible act that separates one from the familiar world? Or can the pursuit of autonomy sometimes coexist with ordinary existence? Daphne's transformation invites reflection on the balance between desire, protection, and self-preservation, leaving the story suspended in the quiet rustle of leaves. A testament to both survival and the extraordinary measures one might take to escape forces beyond control. After Daphne's extraordinary transformation into the laurel tree, Apollo's pursuit came to an abrupt halt. The radiant god, driven by desire beyond reason, found himself confronted with an immutable reality. The object of his longing was no longer within reach. His golden hair glimmered with the light of the sun, yet that brilliance could not illuminate the distance between his desire and Daphne's new form. The laurel stood rooted, serene, and untouchable, a symbol of her autonomy and his inability to possess her. For the first time, Apollo felt the full weight of frustration, a mixture of grief and admiration intertwined with the sharp sting of impotence. Apollo approached the laurel cautiously, circling the tree as if studying it might somehow reverse the transformation. His grief was not quiet. It reverberated through the surrounding forest and echoed across the riverbanks where Pinia's waters flowed. Each rustling leaf reminded him of the nymph he could no longer reach, each sway in the wind a signal of freedom he could not violate. The god's obsession, ignited by Cupid's golden arrow, had initially driven him to relentless pursuit. Yet now that same obsession transformed into a profound mourning, a longing that could not be fulfilled. Desire, once active and consuming, had become a haunting stillness in his grief. Apollo began to interact with the laurel in ways that were both tender and ritualized. He would touch its bark gently, inhale the scent of its leaves, and weave garlands from its branches. These actions, while born of longing, symbolized the transformation of desire into reverence. Apollo could no longer claim Daphne as a lover, yet he could honor her, integrating her new form into his world in a way that reflected both the intensity of his passion and the limits of divine pursuit. The laurel, once the nymph fleeing for her life, now stood as a sacred emblem of both desire and unattainable freedom. The narrative reveals a broader theme within Greek mythology, the tension between obsession and respect for autonomy. Apollo's grief underscores the reality that even gods, for all their power, encounter limits imposed by will, ingenuity, and transformation. The laurel became more than a tree. It became a representation of the delicate balance between love and control, pursuit and acceptance. Apollo's mourning illustrates how desire, when frustrated by circumstance and resistance, can shift from possession to homage, from pursuit to recognition of boundaries beyond one's own power. Yet, a lingering question persisted. Could Apollo's grief ever find resolution, or would the laurel forever symbolize desire unfulfilled, a constant reminder of the distance between longing and possession? The answer remained suspended in the swaying leaves, the rustling branches, and the silent understanding that even divine obsession must eventually confront the limits of its reach. The story of Apollo and Daphne, crystallized in this moment, reflected a complex interplay of love, loss, and reverence that would echo through myth and human imagination for generations. Apollo's grief evolved into a strange mixture of obsession and devotion. The laurel, once Daphne, remained untouchable, yet he could not abandon the intensity of his feelings. His golden gaze lingered on the tree, tracing its branches and leaves as though memorizing every detail. The rustle of the leaves in the wind seemed to carry echoes of Daphne's voice and the rhythm of her flight, reminding Apollo of the pursuit that had defined their encounter. Desire, though frustrated, did not dissipate. It transformed into reverent mourning, an acknowledgement of her autonomy and an eternal fascination with the unattainable dot in this state. Apollo began to integrate the laurel into his rituals and symbols. He declared it sacred, placing it at the center of ceremonies, adorning himself and others with its leaves, and celebrating its enduring presence in poetry and song. The laurel became a living emblem of both beauty and freedom, and Apollo's obsession shifted from attempting possession to honoring what could not be possessed. Each wreath of laurel that crowned poets, athletes, and victors in contests became a testament to the transformation of desire into recognition, to the shift from pursuit to commemoration. In essence, Daphne's escape created a permanent bridge between the human and the divine, allowing Apollo's grief to manifest in cultural practices that immortalized her story. Yet, underlying this reverence was a subtle tension. Apollo's grief, though expressed through homage, was still rooted in the impossibility of fulfillment. Every touch of the laurel, every inhalation of its scent, was a reminder of desire left unconsummated, of the limits of divine power in the face of autonomy. The myth emphasizes that even gods, with their extraordinary abilities, must sometimes contend with boundaries they cannot overcome. Apollo's mourning underscores the complex interplay between love, obsession, and respect for agency. It is not simply a tale of unrequited affection, but a reflection on the consequences of pursuing desire without regard for the other's will. The laurel, as a living monument to Daphne's autonomy, also served as a silent teacher. It illustrated the profound consequences of pursuing another against their will, and demonstrated the unexpected outcomes that can arise from a desperate attempt to preserve freedom. Apollo's grief and transformed desire became a testament to the balance between power and restraint, showing that admiration, once desire is blocked, can take the form of reverence and care. A question remained in the quiet of the forest and along the riverbanks. Could grief and obsession, even when transformed into respect and ritual, ever truly reconcile with the loss of what is desired? Or would Apollo forever carry the tension between longing and acceptance? This unresolved tension, suspended between devotion and frustration, became an enduring aspect of the myth, reminding all who heard it of the complex consequences of desire, pursuit, and the assertion of autonomy in a world where gods and mortals intersect. As time passed, Apollo's grief over Daphne's transformation deepened into a complex blend of longing, admiration, and ritualized devotion. He no longer attempted to possess her. The laurel tree was untouchable, rooted in both the earth and the story of her flight. Instead, he expressed his desire through acts of reverence, making the laurel sacred and placing it at the center of his temples and festivals. Its leaves, vibrant and enduring, became symbols of victory, honor, and poetic inspiration. In doing so, Apollo transformed his unfulfilled passion into a lasting cultural and divine legacy, ensuring that Daphne's story would echo across generations. Immortalized in both myth and tradition, Apollo's mourning also highlighted a critical tension in Greek mythology: the boundaries between desire and respect, pursuit and acceptance. The god, for all his power and divine authority, encountered limits he could not overcome. His longing, once aggressive and insistent, became contemplative, reverent, and ritualized. By embracing the laurel as sacred, Apollo acknowledged that even the strongest desires must sometimes yield to autonomy and transformation. His grief did not vanish. It changed form, becoming a medium through which both he and those who worshipped him could honor Daphne's agency. The laurel's enduring presence became a constant reminder that pursuit does not always lead to possession, and that the preservation of autonomy can inspire admiration, even from those who once sought to dominate. The symbolism of the laurel extended beyond Apollo's grief. It became a living monument to the consequences of obsessive desire and the power of escape. Poets, athletes, and rulers would later wear laurel wreaths, unknowingly participating in the story of pursuit, evasion, and transformation. Each wreath carried the memory of Daphne's flight and the lessons of her autonomy, demonstrating how myth could shape culture, values, and ritual. Through the laurel, Apollo's grief was woven into a broader narrative of human experience, emphasizing the interplay between longing, respect, and recognition of limits. Yet, even as ritual and symbolism provided expression for Apollo's obsession, a lingering question remained. Could any form of homage truly resolve the tension between desire and autonomy, or did the grief itself become a permanent companion, eternally tied to the unattainable? Apollo's mourning suggested that some passions are irreconcilable, that longing and respect can coexist uneasily, and that the memory of pursuit can endure in both divine and mortal consciousness. The laurel stood as a testament to these truths, whispering through its leaves the story of love, loss, and reverence that no act of desire could erase. In the quiet rustle of its branches, the laurel told a story of pursuit halted, of autonomy preserved, and of grief transformed into devotion. It became an enduring symbol not only of Daphne's escape, but of the delicate balance between desire and restraint, reminding all who encountered it of the limits of power, the importance of agency, and the lasting resonance of a story that began with flight and ended in eternal reverence. In Daphne's transformation, the laurel tree assumed a role far greater than a mere refuge from Apollo's pursuit. It became a sacred emblem, entwined with ritual, poetry, and the divine presence of the god whose desire it had once provoked. Apollo, in both grief and admiration, declared the laurel his sacred tree, ensuring its place in Greek culture and myth for generations. The simple act of transformation had produced a permanent symbol, one that carried the story of escape, autonomy, and divine obsession, immortalizing Daphne in a form that could neither be harmed nor possessed. Apollo's reverence for the laurel extended beyond private mourning. He adorned victors of athletic contests, poets, and heroes with wreaths crafted from its leaves. These wreaths became marks of honor, symbols of excellence, and living reminders of a story that bridged mortal ambition and divine influence. Each laurel crown celebrated achievement while silently recalling the narrative of Daphne's flight, the pursuit, the desperation, and the extraordinary act of transformation that secured her autonomy. In this way, a personal myth of evasion and desire was translated into a cultural practice that would endure across centuries. The sacredness of the laurel also highlighted the intertwining of myth and morality. Daphne's transformation was both a literal and symbolic assertion of agency. It demonstrated the consequences of relentless desire and the lengths to which one might go to preserve freedom. Apollo's homage to the tree became a ritual acknowledgement of those boundaries, a recognition that even gods must respect the will of others. The laurel, in its sacred context, reminded worshippers of the delicate balance between longing and restraint, desire and reverence. Its leaves carried the story of pursuit halted, preserving the memory of autonomy in an enduring, tangible form. Furthermore, the laurel's sacred status reinforced the connection between nature and myth. Rivers, forests, and trees in Greek mythology often functioned as both environments and active participants in human and divine stories. Daphne's choice or her father's intervention illustrated how natural forms could mediate between mortal vulnerability and divine forces. The laurel's immortality in ritual symbolized this mediation, transforming a moment of fear and evasion into a permanent emblem of respect, veneration, and cultural memory. The sacred tree became a touchstone, linking the human and divine realms through the story of escape, survival, and reverence. Yet, even with ritual and symbolism, a lingering question remained. Could the sanctity of the laurel fully reconcile the tension between pursuit and autonomy, or would it always echo the unfulfilled desire that had given it significance? Its presence was both celebration and reminder, an enduring monument to the complex interplay of freedom, grief, and admiration. The laurel stood as a quiet testament to the consequences of desire, the power of transformation, and the ways in which myth could immortalize an individual's struggle against forces far greater than themselves. The laurel's elevation to sacred status transformed it into a cultural and symbolic cornerstone of Greek tradition. Apollo's grief and reverence merged into ritual, and the tree became a permanent reminder of both desire and the consequences of pursuing it without consent. Victors in athletic games, poets composing verses, and rulers seeking divine favor all received laurel wreaths, each a tangible symbol of achievement intertwined with myth. Every leaf carried the story of Daphne's flight, her autonomy, and the limits of even a god's power, making her transformation not only a personal escape, but a public lesson encoded in ceremony and culture. The sacredness of the laurel also reinforced the idea that myth could shape societal values. In honoring Daphne through ritual, Apollo acknowledged the significance of personal agency and the repercussions of obsession. Those who wore laurel wreaths, often unaware of the myth in its entirety, still participated in a tradition that celebrated resilience, ingenuity, and the consequences of unchecked desire. The tree's enduring presence in temples, competitions, and festivals illustrated how myth could translate complex moral and social lessons into tangible symbols, creating a lasting bridge between divine narrative and human experience. Moreover, the laurel's integration into Greek culture emphasized the interplay between the natural and divine worlds. Daphne's transformation, guided by her father and the forces of nature, became the foundation for a sacred object that would endure beyond her individual existence. Rivers, forests, and trees in mythology often mediated between mortal vulnerability and divine influence, and the laurel exemplified this principle perfectly. It transformed a moment of personal danger into a shared symbol of reverence, survival, and memory. Through ritualized honor, the tree became a living testament to the extraordinary measures one could take to preserve freedom and the enduring respect owed to that agency, even by a god. Yet, Apollo's attachment to the laurel carried a subtle tension. While he could honor the tree and integrate it into worship, the object of his desire remained unattainable, rooted and immutable. The god's grief was thus perpetually transformed into ritual, a constant reminder that longing and reverence could coexist uneasily. The laurel embodied both autonomy and longing, freedom and remembrance, illustrating that myth does not merely entertain but preserves the complexity of human and divine interaction. Its sacredness was not just symbolic, it carried the echo of pursuit, of desire met with resistance, and of survival achieved through extraordinary means. A final question lingered in the minds of those who encountered the laurel. Whether consciously or not, could reverence and ritual ever fully reconcile? The tension between desire and autonomy, or would the sacred tree always echo the unfulfilled longing that had granted it significance? The laurel's presence, enduring in temples and ceremonies, invited reflection on the delicate balance of respect, longing, and immortalization, and on the ways myth transforms both narrative and cultural memory into symbols of eternal meaning. The laurel's sacred status ensured that Daphne's story would endure far beyond the fleeting moment of her transformation. Apollo, through both grief and devotion, had created a lasting monument that intertwined personal myth with collective ritual. Each branch, each leaf, carried the memory of pursuit, evasion, and ultimate freedom, transforming a personal act of survival into a symbol recognized and revered across generations. The laurel, now eternal, bridged the divide between mortal experience and divine narrative, offering a tangible reminder that autonomy and ingenuity could outlast even the most intense desire. In ritual, the laurel became a conduit for human achievement and divine reverence. Victors in the Olympic Games received wreaths, poets crowned themselves with leaves, and rulers honored the tree in ceremonies that celebrated both success and the symbolic lessons of mythology. Every use of the laurel perpetuated Daphne's story, a narrative of flight, fear, and extraordinary transformation that transcended ordinary existence. Through these practices, the laurel not only commemorated a singular event, but embedded the moral and symbolic weight of the myth into daily life, reminding generations that desire must be tempered with respect, and that freedom, once preserved, carries enduring significance. Apollo's mourning, reframed through ritual, demonstrated the profound ways in which desire can evolve. His grief did not vanish. It was transmuted into reverence, creating a space where admiration coexisted with unattainable longing. The laurel, untouchable yet celebrated, embodied this transformation. The god's obsession, once active and consuming, had become contemplative and symbolic. Through repeated ritual, the laurel reminded observers that even the most intense passions must sometimes yield to the agency of others, and that true respect acknowledges boundaries while honoring memory. The story of the laurel also emphasizes the enduring relationship between nature, transformation, and cultural symbolism. Daphne's flight, the river's currents, the forest's concealment, and her father's intervention culminated in a transformation that merged human or nymphly existence with the natural world. The sacred laurel, rooted in earth and myth, illustrated how extraordinary circumstances could produce symbols that are both culturally resonant and spiritually enduring. It became a reminder that survival, autonomy, and clever intervention can shape not just individual fate but collective consciousness, leaving a legacy that endures in ritual, art, and tradition. Yet a lingering question persists. Can any ritual, however sacred, fully resolve the tension between longing and autonomy? Or does the laurel forever echo both Daphne's escape and Apollo's unfulfilled desire? The tree stands as a testament to the delicate balance between pursuit and restraint, desire and reverence, fear and ingenuity. Its enduring presence invites reflection on the power of myth to preserve memory, teach lessons, and transform the ordinary details of survival and escape into symbols of eternal significance, ensuring that Daphne's story and the lessons it carries will never be forgotten. The myth of Apollo and Daphne resonates far beyond the immediacy of pursuit and transformation, extending into broader lessons about desire, rejection, and the consequences of both. Daphne's flight, her desperate evasion, and her ultimate transformation into the laurel tree reflect themes that are central to Greek mythology: the tension between longing and autonomy, the limits of power, and the ways in which actions divine or mortal produce lasting consequences. In the story, desire is not a simple emotion but a force capable of shaping behavior, invoking fear, and demanding extraordinary measures for its resolution. Apollo's longing for Daphne illustrates the intensity and sometimes destructive nature of desire. The golden arrow of Cupid ensured that his passion would be consuming, compelling him to pursue with relentless energy. Yet the myth shows that desire, no matter how powerful, can be thwarted by another's agency and determination. Daphne's rejection is both literal and symbolic. It embodies the assertion of personal freedom in the face of overwhelming pursuit. Her ability to elude Apollo demonstrates that autonomy can resist even divine compulsion, emphasizing a key moral lesson: desire, if unchecked or disregarding the will of others, can never guarantee fulfillment. The consequences of rejection are equally significant in Greek mythology. Apollo's grief, transformed into ritual and reverence toward the laurel, illustrates how desire interacts with morality, respect, and symbolic expression. His mourning acknowledges the limits of pursuit, while creating a form of commemoration that preserves memory and cultural meaning. The laurel's sacredness conveys an important lesson. Rejection does not necessarily erase desire, but can reshape it into forms that honor autonomy while maintaining acknowledgement of what was sought. This transformation from pursuit to ritualized homage exemplifies how Greek myths often provide complex, nuanced reflections on human emotion, behavior, and ethics. The symbolism embedded in the myth extends beyond the characters themselves. The forest, the river, and the laurel tree all serve as metaphors for protection, resilience, and the enduring presence of personal choice. Nature, acting in concert with divine intervention, illustrates how external forces can assist in preserving freedom when circumstances become dangerous or overwhelming. Daphne's flight and transformation symbolize the extraordinary lengths one may take to maintain autonomy and the lasting impact such decisions have on culture, ritual, and collective memory. The myth, therefore, functions as both story and lesson, embedding practical and ethical reflections within its narrative structure. A lingering question emerges from this symbolism: does desire inherently challenge the autonomy of others, or can it coexist with respect for boundaries without leading to conflict? The myth of Apollo and Daphne leaves this unresolved, inviting reflection on the balance between longing, action, and moral restraint. By observing the pursuit, flight, and transformation, the story encourages contemplation of human emotion, divine influence, and the enduring consequences of both, ensuring that the lessons of desire and rejection remain embedded in cultural consciousness for generations. Apollo and Daphne's story reveals how desire and rejection operate not only as personal experiences but as enduring symbols within Greek mythology. Apollo's pursuit, driven by Cupid's arrow, demonstrates how intense longing can overwhelm reason, ethics, and propriety. His relentless chase represents the force of desire when left unchecked, while Daphne's refusal embodies the assertion of autonomy against overwhelming power. In Greek myths, such dynamics are rarely resolved simply. Instead, they illustrate tensions that persist, offering lessons about restraint, respect, and the ethical consequences of human or divine action. Daphne's rejection is as instructive as Apollo's desire. By fleeing and ultimately transforming into the laurel, she exercises agency in the most extreme way possible, creating a permanent boundary that cannot be breached. Her actions show that rejection is not passive. It can be an active, creative response to danger or unwanted attention. In this sense, Greek mythology frames refusal as a powerful form of self-preservation. Daphne's flight and transformation also highlight the interconnectedness of human action, divine influence, and the natural world. The river that her father Peneus controls and the forest through which she runs serve as metaphors for assistance, opportunity, and the subtle ways in which autonomy can be protected in an otherwise overwhelming environment. Apollo's grief and reverence after Daphne's transformation deepen the symbolic resonance of the story. His mourning becomes ritualized in the laurel's sacred status, bridging the gap between desire and respect. By honoring the tree, Apollo demonstrates that unfulfilled longing can take a constructive form, transforming obsession into veneration rather than violation. This shift emphasizes the ethical dimension of desire. Unchecked passion can lead to harm, but when tempered with recognition of limits, it can be expressed through reverence, memory, and cultural tradition. The laurel thus becomes a symbol of both rejection and lasting influence, showing that autonomy and respect can coexist with remembrance, even when desire remains unfulfilled. The myth also serves as a cautionary tale regarding the limits of power. Apollo, a god, embodies near omnipotent capability, yet he encounters a boundary he cannot overcome. This demonstrates a central theme in Greek mythology. No force, however mighty, is absolute when confronted with the determined assertion of will. Daphne's transformation and the laurel's sacredness offer a lesson about balance and consequences, illustrating that the interplay between desire and rejection carries implications far beyond immediate circumstances. A question remains, lingering quietly within the symbolic layers of the myth: can desire ever be fully reconciled with respect for autonomy, or are the two forces inherently in tension? Apollo and Daphne's story leaves this question unresolved, inviting reflection on the ethical, emotional, and cultural dimensions of longing, pursuit, and refusal. By engaging with this narrative, the listener is reminded that Greek myths were not only stories of gods and mortals, but frameworks for understanding human behavior, boundaries, and the complex interplay between passion and restraint. In the final analysis, Apollo and Daphne's story illustrates the enduring tension between desire and autonomy, providing lessons that extend far beyond the immediate narrative. Apollo's longing, intense and unrelenting, is a reflection of the human and divine capacity for obsession. Yet Daphne's evasion and ultimate transformation into the laurel tree demonstrate that no matter how powerful desire may be, it can be countered by ingenuity, courage, and the assertion of personal agency. This juxtaposition highlights a central moral in Greek mythology: desire cannot justify transgression, and freedom, once asserted, demands recognition. The laurel, now immortalized through ritual, ceremonies, and symbolic use, embodies this balance. Apollo's grief, converted into homage, shows that unfulfilled desire can be transformed into a constructive, reverential form, linking personal passion with cultural practice. Every wreath placed upon a victor's head, every poem adorned with the image of the laurel, carried the memory of pursuit and rejection, embedding Daphne's autonomy into the very fabric of Greek tradition. The story thereby transcends individual experience, becoming a lasting testament to the ethical and cultural consequences of desire and refusal. Moreover, the myth underscores the significance of natural and divine forces in shaping outcomes. Daphne's transformation was aided by her father, Peneus, and the natural environment, illustrating how external forces, whether parental guidance, environmental conditions, or divine intervention, can enable the preservation of autonomy when threatened. The laurel's sacred status then elevates this moment from a personal act of survival to a symbol recognized across generations. It is both a reminder and a lesson. The assertion of agency, even in the face of overwhelming power, can create enduring cultural and moral impact. The symbolic resonance of Apollo's grief and Daphne's escape continues to provoke reflection. Desire, when unchecked, may compel pursuit, yet rejection does not merely end longing, it transforms it. Apollo's mourning, ritualized in reverence for the laurel, illustrates that even unfulfilled passion can be redirected into constructive cultural practices, creating meaning from what initially seems like loss. Greek mythology frequently presents such moral and emotional complexities, using stories of gods and mortals to explore the nuances of human behavior, boundaries, and the consequences of action. Finally, the story invites a lingering question. Can longing and respect ever be reconciled completely, or will desire always exist in tension with autonomy? The laurel, rooted and eternal, stands as a living reminder of this delicate balance. It memorializes the flight, the transformation, and the grief that followed, demonstrating that myth preserves not only the events themselves, but the lessons they carry. Apollo and Daphne's tale, crystallized in the sacred laurel, continues to echo across time, reminding all who hear it of the enduring interplay between passion, restraint, and respect for freedom. The myth of Apollo and Daphne has resonated through centuries, leaving its mark not only on Greek culture but on art, literature, and philosophy across the Western world. Artists, poets, and scholars have repeatedly returned to this story, drawn by its vivid imagery, emotional intensity, and symbolic depth. The tale's enduring appeal lies in its combination of desire, pursuit, and transformation, a narrative that continues to offer reflection on human emotion, morality, and the tension between longing and autonomy. Even though the story originates in the distant world of Greek mythology, its themes remain compelling, inviting interpretation and adaptation in countless forms over time. Visual artists, particularly during the Renaissance, found the myth irresistibly rich. Painters and sculptors emphasized the dramatic moment of Daphne's transformation into the laurel tree, capturing both the tension of pursuit and the miraculous act of escape. Sculpture, with its three-dimensional permanence, allowed viewers to witness the metamorphosis in frozen motion, Daphne's fingers elongating into branches, her body rooted into the earth, and Apollo reaching toward a desire now unreachable. These depictions highlighted not only physical transformation but the emotional gravity of longing and grief, making the myth a poignant subject for exploration of human and divine passion. Writers and poets similarly drew inspiration from the story, from classical Roman poets like Ovid, whose metamorphoses immortalized the narrative, to modern adaptations The tale offered a framework for exploring the psychological and moral implications of desire and rejection. Poets often reflected on Apollo's grief, his reverence for the laurel, and the lessons embedded in Daphne's flight. Literary treatments emphasized the universality of longing, the inevitability of limits, and the ways in which autonomy can inspire both fear and admiration. Through verse, the myth became a meditation on human emotion, divine interaction, and the ethical consequences of pursuit, extending its resonance far beyond its original mythological context. The story's legacy also reaches into broader cultural symbolism. The laurel tree, already sacred to Apollo, became emblematic of victory, achievement, and intellectual accomplishment. Its use in crowns for poets, philosophers, and rulers demonstrates how myth shaped rituals, status, and cultural ideals. Daphne's flight, initially a tale of fear and survival, thus became a symbol of triumph, artistry, and moral reflection. The myth's artistic and literary interpretations allow successive generations to engage with its themes, ensuring that the story remains alive in both visual and intellectual culture. A lingering reflection emerges from this enduring presence. How does a story rooted in pursuit, escape, and transformation continue to captivate artists and audiences millennia later? Perhaps it is the universal tension between desire and autonomy, the vividness of transformation, and the enduring power of myth to bridge human emotion with cultural expression. Apollo and Daphne's story, in its infinite echoes through art and literature, demonstrates that even the most ancient myths can leave a lasting imprint, shaping imagination, symbolism, and the ways in which we reflect on human and divine experience. The influence of Apollo and Daphne's story extends far beyond its origins in ancient Greek mythology, resonating deeply in literature across cultures and centuries. Ovid's Metamorphoses was particularly instrumental in cementing the narrative as a timeless exploration of desire, rejection, and transformation. His detailed account provided vivid imagery, psychological insight, and poetic depth, offering later writers and artists a rich foundation for interpretation. Scholars have noted how Ovid's portrayal of both Apollo's obsession and Daphne's fear highlights the tension between agency and desire, a theme that continues to inspire reflections on human behavior and morality. In Renaissance Europe, the tale became a favorite subject for painters and sculptors seeking to depict intense emotion and dramatic transformation. Artists such as Lorenzo Bernini, whose iconic marble sculpture Apollo and Daphne captures the exact moment of metamorphosis, translated myth into tangible three-dimensional form. The sculpture emphasizes motion, fear, and beauty simultaneously. Daphne's hands elongate into branches, her toes fuse into roots, and Apollo reaches for what he can no longer grasp. Through such art, viewers experience not only the story's narrative, but the emotional intensity of longing, grief, and unattainable desire. The myth's adaptability to visual representation demonstrates its enduring power to communicate complex ideas about passion, autonomy, and consequence. Literary adaptations continued to explore these themes across languages and eras. Poets, playwrights, and novelists engage with the story as a lens through which to examine the nature of pursuit, the pain of unrequited desire, and the ethical dilemmas inherent in human longing. Even in modern reinterpretations, the tension between pursuit and personal autonomy remains central, showing how deeply the narrative resonates with universal human experiences. Daphne's flight, Apollo's grief, and the laurel's symbolism provide rich metaphors for understanding restraint, respect, and the consequences of unchecked desire. The story's influence is also evident in cultural and symbolic practices. The laurel tree, associated with victory and intellectual achievement, carries with it echoes of Daphne's escape and the lessons embedded in Apollo's grief. Laureates, poets, and winners of various contests are crowned with laurel wreaths, a tradition that links achievement to mythic narrative. This ritualized use demonstrates how mythology shapes cultural memory, embedding ethical and symbolic lessons into everyday life. Through literature, art, and ritual, the myth becomes both a story of individual passion and a reflection of collective values. Yet, even as Apollo and Daphne's narrative is immortalized in countless artistic and literary forms, an unresolved question remains. Why does the story continue to captivate audiences across centuries and cultures? Perhaps it is the universality of longing, the power of transformation, and the enduring tension between desire and autonomy that resonates so deeply. The myth's echoes in art and literature remind us that human emotion, moral complexity, and cultural memory are inseparably intertwined, ensuring that Daphne's flight and Apollo's grief remain vivid and meaningful, even millennia after their first telling. The story of Apollo and Daphne continues to resonate because it speaks to universal human experiences, moral and cultural. Artists and writers have repeatedly returned to this myth, drawn to its tension between desire and autonomy, pursuit and rejection, and the transformative power of adversity. Daphne's metamorphosis into the laurel tree is not just the end of a chase, it symbolizes resilience, freedom, and the consequences of unchecked longing. Through this lens, the myth provides a framework for exploring themes that remain relevant even today. Sculptors like Bernini and Renaissance painters captured this transformation with striking detail, highlighting both its physical and emotional dimensions. Daphne's fingers stretching into branches, her feet rooting into the earth, immortalize the moment when fear, agency, and divine intervention intersect. These images invite viewers to reflect on the delicate balance between desire and restraint, pursuit and respect. Each artistic rendition preserves the myth while encouraging contemplation of the ethical and emotional complexities in human interaction. Literature, too, has continually reinterpreted Apollo and Daphne, adapting its themes to different cultural contexts while retaining the story's central tension. Poets, novelists, and playwrights explored the emotional impact of desire, the effects of rejection, and the symbolic meaning of the laurel. Such reinterpretations reveal our ongoing fascination with narratives that probe passion, moral limits, and consequences. By revisiting the myth, authors prompt audiences to consider how longing can inspire both creation and destruction, and how the assertion of autonomy commands reflection, admiration, and even ritual reverence. The laurel tree itself became a living legacy of Daphne's story. Crowns of laurel worn by poets, rulers, and victors symbolize achievement, honor, and ethical reflection, showing how myth can influence cultural rituals. The laurel bridges myth and practice, connecting human experience with symbolic meaning across generations. Yet the story poses a lasting question. Can the lessons of desire, rejection, and transformation ever be fully absorbed, or will the tension between longing and autonomy persist? Apollo and Daphne's myth, immortalized through art, literature, and ritual, suggests that these tensions endure. Its legacy persists because it captures the complexity of human emotion, the importance of respecting autonomy, and the power of transformation to create lasting cultural resonance. The myth, then, is not merely a tale of gods and mortals, but a mirror reflecting timeless truths about passion, restraint, and memory. And so we come to the gentle close of our little journey through disturbing love stories from Greek mythology. Thank you for being here, for letting your mind wander with me through these tales of longing, pursuit, and quiet transformation, wherever you are now. May your night be just as still as theirs once was. Perhaps you're tucked beneath a warm blanket, or watching snow settle softly outside your window, or the last flicker of a candle painting gentle shadows across the room. Take a slow breath, feel the weight of the day ease away, and know that these stories, strange and haunting though they may be, have shared a quiet space with you tonight. If it feels right, you may subscribe, simply to return to this calm, soothing space whenever your mind seeks it. No rush, no pressure, just gentle nights filled with soft stories. And now, let the world around you drift into hushed whispers, the night folding its dark, tender arms across the land. And let your thoughts sink into the quiet, warm embrace of sleep. The stories rest here, and so can you.